We're talking budgeting today. Budgeting. Most importantly, the budgeting method that changed my life. Hi, I'm Kamiko from The Budget Mom. Come along with me as I strive to live a life I love on a budget that I can afford. Welcome to the Budget Mom YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about something really exciting and maybe a little bit unique. So today we're going to be talking about the budgeting method that I use in my real life. Now, if you follow me on Instagram, you are well aware of my budget by paycheck method. And I thought it might be a little bit easier before we jump into the actual method, how I developed this system. So I've been budgeting since 2011, and so that's 8 years of budgeting, and I would say that my first 2 years were the hardest. That was the 2 years that I really experimented and used different budgeting methods because I found myself failing time and time again. I cannot tell you how many budgets I started and didn't finish because I got frustrated that they weren't working in my real life. And one of my big problems and one of the big aha moments that I had during my budgeting journey is realizing that I needed to budget my money based on when I was getting paid. So I get paid twice a month. I'm paid on the 5th and the 20th of every month, which means I create two budgets every month. I create a budget on the 5th and a budget on the 20th. By making that one small adjustment and making that one small change, it was that aha moment that was like, oh my gosh, this is why it wasn't working in the beginning. This is why I kept failing time and time again. If you get paid once a month, it makes sense to budget your money or to budget your income once a month. But what about the people or like people like me who get paid multiple times a month? Trying to conform and fit your budget into a monthly template just doesn't make sense. At least not for me. And by changing and making that one change to how I handle and manage my money, made it all worth it. And I've been successfully budgeting for the last 6 years. So here's how my budget by paycheck workbook really works. I budget my money when I get paid, like I explained. I do 2 paychecks, but I don't just budget my bills. My budget by paycheck method is not just for budgeting. It's an overall financial plan for your money. So each budget incorporates every part of your financial plan. It lists out variable spending, debt, savings. I wanted to make sure that I included every aspect of my financial life into my budget. So let me show you my budget by paycheck method. I try sharing my story to remind leaders that there is a way out, that with hard work, dedication, determination, motivation, it's all about having a plan for your money, and that's what gives you the true control. Holy crap, it just changed my life. You're like, oh man, Nico, it takes time, it takes dedication, it takes work, but no more credit card debt. So what you're currently looking at, and it's my budget by paycheck workbook, okay? And I'm going to give you a rundown of my budgeting method. So here's a perfect example of the calendar method. The first thing that I start the month with is what I call a budget calendar. Now, everything on this calendar is things that need to be included in my budget. Now, I am a paycheck budgeter, like I explained, which means I create a budget every time I'm paid. I am paid on the 5th and I'm paid on the 20th of every single month. So it's a matter of writing down all of my regular bills, my monthly bills first. Then what I do is I assign which bills I want to pay with what paycheck. So for instance, everything highlighted in blue is going to be paid with my paycheck on the 5th. Everything highlighted in pink is going to be paid with my paycheck on the 20th. Yellow is for holidays or events. And then these purple things that you see going on are for like my appointments that I have. A doctor appointment that I might need a copay for, or maybe it's a beauty or salon appointment. My appointments are in purple. Everything on this calendar needs to be included in my budget. Things that I have to be spending money on. Now we're going to be looking at the month of November as an example to show you my budgeting method, but that's the calendar method. And this is the step where a lot of people get hung up on. It's a matter of playing that trial and error, figuring out the best way to pay your bills so it makes sense to the paychecks that you're receiving. Okay. The next thing I have is what I call a paycheck bill tracker. Now, this is the meat and bones of my budget. This is my budget. I have two. I have one for the paycheck that I receive on the 5th, and I have one paycheck that I receive for the 20th. Now, don't ask me why these are like this in this order, but my paycheck on the 5th is the first one I received in November. I literally take the bills that are in blue and I add them to my budget. These are the monthly bills that I'm paying with my paycheck on the 5th. I then subtract my bills from my budgeted income, and I'm left with the leftover dollar. Now, your budget should not just include your regular bills. It should also include your variable spending, things like groceries, fun expenses, gas, maybe beauty expenses. Now, these are the envelopes. I'm a cash envelope budgeter, so this is where the cash envelopes comes into play. I'm an all cash spender, which means I never swipe my debit card, and I do that for one reason. My budgeting method is designed to deter you from using credit cards, because I just got done paying off my credit card debt, and I really want to be able to use and plan and spend with cash rather than debt. Now, if you are a credit card spender, that's fine. I use the cash envelope method, and I assign cash limits that I then stick into cash envelopes that kind of look like this. They look like this. These would be labeled with the categories that I'm going to be spending my money on. But I then use my leftover income after subtracting my regular bills, and I assign it to my variable spending. The great thing about the cash envelope method is that it's a visual method. Now, if you have a problem with overspending, having that physical cash in your hands to say, hey, this is how much you have to spend. It's very easy to say, oh, I only have $20 left to spend on groceries, or oh, maybe I only have $10 to spend in gas. It really helps with overspending, which is the one reason why I really love the cash envelope method and why I added it to my budgeting method. So if you subtract all of your cash envelopes from the income you have left over, so I had $886 left over after paying my regular bills from my paycheck that I received on November 5th. If you subtract all of my variable spending or my cash envelope spending, I'm left with $520. Now, your main budget, your budgeted income, the income that you are receiving should be enough to cover your regular bills and your variable spending. If it doesn't, you have a problem, because it's your regular bills and things like your groceries and your gas, and maybe you have some pet expenses if you have an animal at home. Those things need to be paid every month, and your income should be covering those things. If you subtract your budgeted or your bills and your variable spending or your cash envelopes, if you have money left over after these two things, you're good. You're golden, because that means now you can allocate it to things in your life that are important to you, your goals, your priorities. So I use any of my leftover income for a couple of different things. My budgeting method isn't just for budgeting. It's an overall financial plan for your money. That means it includes savings. It includes debt. So I have sinking funds, and I like to save for all of my holidays and events. So for instance, 2019, I have all of my holidays and events planned to have cash for those events ahead of time. And I do that by using sinking funds. I put a little bit of money every month aside into a savings for my holidays and events. So I'm currently saving for New Year's, Valentine's Day, And on November 5th, I was also saving for Christmas. I hit my Christmas savings goal this last month, and so I don't have it again, but this is what I was planning for on my November 5th paycheck. I then subtract my savings from the income I had left over. It gives me $310 left. Well, where can I use that $310 to make the biggest impact in my life or my goals or priorities? For me, it's debt. I have my student loans and my car payment I still need to pay off. Anything extra that I have, I am throwing at debt. So there's an area to put extra debt payments. This is what I call my paycheck bill tracker. It's a huge part of my budgeting method because this is my budget. Because I'm using cash envelopes, I have a sheet called a cash envelope breakdown. And this allows me to write down all of these different cash envelopes, the amount that I want to have in each envelope, and it allows me to say, hey, what bill denominations do I want for those envelopes? And what I have learned along my financial journey is it's harder to spend the higher denominations than it is the lower. It's a lot harder to hand someone, say, a $100 bill than it is a $10 bill, and that's a psychological thing. It's just something that I kind of picked up along my way. So what I do is, so for instance, let's look at my grocery envelope. I assign $200 every paycheck for my groceries. That means I'm going to pull out two $100 bills. I like to go from the highest denomination to the lowest. So I start here and I work my way down. But it allows you to say how many bills you need for each denomination, and you can go ahead and add the value of that. This might be hard to see, but there's a little slip that you can cut out and hand to the teller. It just tells her what bills you need and the total that it adds up to. Makes it super quick. You can just go in and hand it to the teller. So this is part of my budget method. I do my cash envelope breakdown for my cash envelopes. Now, this is the first step in my budgeting method, and it's tracking your expenses. Nothing is more important than tracking your expenses for your budget, because what this is, it's the underlying foundation for your budget. It's going to tell you, based on where you're spending your money, what categories you need to include in your budget. It's also going to tell you how much money to assign to each category in your budget based on the true realistic spending that you have going on in your life. So before I tell people to even sit down and create a budget, I tell them, don't even worry about creating a budget. I wanted you to track your spending for at least a month. Figure out, be aware of where your dollars are going, because then you will have realistic values to use for your budget. That's what makes your budget realistic. That's what makes it successful. So I keep two expense trackers, one for my checking account, one for my cash spending. So I like to keep an updated tally or updated running balance of my checking account. I like to know what's in my checking account at all times. Now for me, when I fill out an expense tracker, I like to categorize my spending by using the highlighter method. And that's basically highlighting like transaction in a particular color. So for instance, all of my food expenses would be in blue. All of my debt expenses will be in orange. This is how I track my spending, and I'll be putting some helpful links on more of these worksheets in the description of this video. I'm quickly running through my budgeting method, but you need to track your spending. That's the first step. Then you can go ahead and create your budget. Now, like I had mentioned, my budgeting method just isn't for budgeting. It's an overall financial plan for your money. So that also includes, and we'll come back to these sheets, but that also includes figuring out a plan to pay off your debt. Now, if you're feeling overwhelmed with the amount of debt that you have, the moment you create a plan to pay it off, you will feel so much better. And for me, I'm using the avalanche method, which means I'm paying off my debt with the highest interest rate first. But the next step, after you track your spending and you create your budget, okay, then it's time to come and sit down Because you can't really figure out your debt plan until you know how much extra money you have to throw at your debt. And you don't know that until you track your spending and create a budget and figure out how much extra money you have for your extra debt payments. That's why this is in steps. Track spending, create budget, create a debt payoff plan. After that, you need to start thinking about savings. Now, like I said, here are my sinking funds for my savings. Now, you should also be thinking about having an emergency savings. It should be something that you include in your budget as a regular bill. Your minimum debt payments and your savings contributions, savings contributions should be counted as a regular bill, especially if you're trying to build up an emergency savings account. You have to treat it like a bill. Okay, it has to be paid. So I also include visual trackers. I am a huge believer in visual trackers to visualize and see your progress as you go along, because as we know, financial plans or a financial journey of any sort, sometimes it's hard to see your progress. Sometimes it feels like you're not making any progress at all. But if you can visually see your progress, it's a way to see you are making progress even when you feel like you're not. So I'm a huge believer in visual trackers. The next part of my budgeting method is figuring out your monthly net worth. Okay, you want your net worth to grow from month to month. Now, essentially your net worth is just your assets minus your liabilities. What do you owe? What do you own versus what do you owe? So you want your net worth to grow. Now, this is a part of my budgeting method is because it's signs of progress. If you're seeing your net worth grow every month, you're making progress. Either you're increasing your assets or you're decreasing what you own or what you owe, your liabilities. So you're either making progress on one of these sides. Okay, it's kind of like a balancing act. You know, if your assets increase and your liabilities decrease, you're going to have a higher net worth. So that's also part of my budgeting method. Now, it's just really super important to grasp the concept of paying your bills and budgeting your money based on when you get paid. I think this is the hardest part to grasp, as well as remembering that the first step is always tracking your spending. This is the most important step. So this is my budgeting method. It's called the budget by paycheck method. So anytime you see me talking about my budgeting or anything like that on YouTube, I'm referring to this budgeting method and these worksheets. It's called the Budget by Paycheck Workbook. I'll be putting links to all of this in the description of the video, as well as some links to some articles that detail more of these worksheets. But this is it. And I'll tell you what, I have never been so successful with my money until I implemented this plan into my life. So if you're wondering about the Budget by Paycheck Workbook, this is what I'm talking about. If you have any questions, make sure you head over to my free Facebook community. We talk a lot about the Budget by Paycheck Workbook over there. If you found this video helpful, please share it and don't forget to subscribe.